Greetings ladies and gentlemen, it's Hydra here with Roll Corruption. We've got another video for you today talking about plot structure. This is going to be an interesting video. It's going to require a pen and paper, only joking. I'm going to be throwing my notes up on the Patreon afterwards just so you can see effectively my written script for this, and hopefully that will be of some use for you. But by the end of this video you're going to understand what the main two types of plot structure are within storytelling and how they relate to TTRPGs and how you can use them to help guide your TTRPG, how to run a particular type of campaign and run it well. You'll also get a good understanding of what types of campaigns have different strengths and weaknesses and which ones may appeal to different preferences. Just before we get started though, I have to define two terms: organic incident and imposed incident. Now these have been somewhat cooked by myself and moulded from some terms taken from The Anatomy of a Story, which is a very good book. But anyway, an organic incident is something created in appearance by the player. It's in consequence to, in reaction to, or as a result of something they've done. It seems believable. It seems that the world is unfolding in front of them. It seems that things are being created by what they have already done. That is an organic incident. Last week you pissed off the barkeeper. This week he refuses to sell you the drink. Oh, he refuses to even let you stay there for the night. Now you've got an organic incident because it's cold outside and you're going to freeze to death otherwise, or you'll get mugged and killed out in the streets. That's an organic incident, a problem you have to solve that you yourself will feel like you created. An imposed incident is, "Hello, adventurer, would you like to help me kill a troll? You look like you're very capable." It's imposed. It's something that will feel like it's been put there for you, but it is not something that you as a player created. Now, neither of these two are bad or good. Both are needed in different situations in varying quantities. So we're going to be talking about that, and by the end of this video you'll understand everything of what I've just said. So we're going to get started with the hero journey. Now the journey plot structure is one you'll have seen. Lord of the Rings, classic. Take a ring, go put it in here, otherwise this really bad guy is going to come back and terrible things will happen, so please hurry up. And rip Boromir in advance. So basically, in this journey, the heroes move from A to B and encounter a series of obstacles or opponents along the way, and after they have overcome each one, they can move forwards. This is very, very clear structure. So the benefit of this is pretty apparent, I think. You have, or can have, a variety of biomes, enemies, monsters, obstacles, weather patterns. You can have all sorts of variety to this, and that's great for introducing, well, variety, but keeping players' imagination within a canon-rich setting alive. The journey is really well suited to that, and it's just fantastic. But it does come at a cost, and the cost is also, I feel, fairly apparent, and it's harder for a GM to present a believable, emphasis on the word believable, organic incidents. And not impossible, but harder. Past incidents in previous locations are going to be difficult to tie in to things that you're now doing. This is where you sometimes have the old classic foreshadowing of, here's a sword for no apparent reason. Oh, later there's a quest that you need the sword for. This can be done, but it all is very imposed incident related. Not a lot of it will feel particularly organic along the way. It is possible to have some organic incidents, but in a fantasy setting where there's no mobile phones and it's quite difficult for anyone to travel, let alone the heroes, it's at least very difficult to make truly believable organic incidents on a regular basis. So, from that, we now know that imposed incidents will be more prevalent. You'll go to the new town, you'll meet the person that you've been told to meet, and, hello, would you like to help me save the sheep from a tree? You can be presented with more and more of these incidents that basically move you along your plot. And it liberates the more mechanically minded GM and the mechanically minded player that perhaps prefers to know what their challenge is, to know what their objective is, and doesn't want to use too much grey matter in trying to figure out what they need to be doing, as everything is normally presented to the player. I would say at this point as well that the big bad is normally fairly apparent. The problem is fairly apparent, even though the players may never meet the big bad. They never really, well, you could say Frodo met Sauron, but in many situations you just simply need knowledge of why you're having to do it. I have to take this ring to this mountain, otherwise XYZ will happen. And normally, a fair degree of information can be afforded to the players in this situation, because that is what produces the drive for them to move forwards. If you have an absence of that, well, you may have problems. We're going to talk about the fail states of the journey type campaign in just a mo. So, there is one other smaller issue first, and that is that it can seem very episodic. For players, it can be, if there is a bit of a lack of autonomy and clash between the GM and the players, it can be a bit frustrating, because you know that the moment you're done here, you're moving on. That sort of detachment from the setting can become quite... It can make a player impatient even, or even just feel like, well, actually I don't have to be here this week, because next week the players will have figured it out, and then we'll be in the mines where I wanted to be, because that's where the dwarfs are. That detachment can lead to some issues, especially if you're creating small micro zones for players to inhabit for short periods of time, and one or two of them are just less interesting than the others. So it is perhaps even more important to have a escalation of tension and drama to make sure it remains interesting and that players don't regret going somewhere. So here are the main 2 weak points though. Weak plot, resulting in confusion or lack of motivation. That is something that's very easy to do within the journey of the hero, is to not present enough information about where they're going and why, which results in them being confused. It's so easy to have, you have been paid to take this person from here to there. Firstly, that's not your plot. That's not a plot. That's a setting. If they are presented with that, this person has to be taken here to get to the healer, that's a little bit better. Or they will die, that's a little bit better. They will die a horrible and painful death, that's even better. Oh, and it's your sister. Even better. Now you're very motivated to go on and do this. And the journey therefore requires a strong plot, and a fairly obvious one, and a fairly decent precipitating event to push the process along. If not, you get players that are sat around waiting for imposed incidents, thinking, well, I'm not sure how we get out of this town, so let's just wait and see what the GM tells us to do. Or you kind of have the GM sat there thinking, well, my players aren't really being proactive, so I'm just going to let them stew here for a while. Neither of these situations are good. Now, the other main fail state is if the preference of the party is high levels of autonomy and creativity, and the GM has planned everything in advance down to the T, effectively you can end up reducing your player agency to the point of railroading them because you haven't planned for specific places. So if you have 2 points on a map, and you have planned from A to B and everything within it, and you have players that don't necessarily like that visualization, you have a problem, because they will have creative ideas along the way, and you will have to come up with a satisfying excuse as to why they can't do it, which will produce varying levels of perturbment at your GM, basically slapping you on the wrist for trying to play a game and having fun in a make-believe world. How dare you not do what I've planned for you, ungrateful cretin. It's a danger, but this is where knowing your players is super important, and this is where I have to emphasize something. The journey plot structure is not the railroad. It's not the same thing. You can run a complete sandbox in this. We'll be doing a video on that separately, and going through some tips and tricks as to how to do that, but this is not necessarily a railroad linear journey. It's moving from point A to point B, the sandbox being everything around that. They're just simply moving within a sandbox, rather than constantly wandering around in random directions. And now we come to the reveals plot. If you've ever seen a crime drama or something like that, you'll have seen this. This is where you have one geographic location, normally a town, could be a city, could be smaller, could be a hotel or something like that, and the problem is revealed to the players relatively early on, but the information is limited. Thus, the quest is really to gain more information about the problem to solve the issue. So there is a clear benefit to this sort of crime drama style plot system, and that is that you can have lots and lots of potential organic plot. You have prolonged exposure and interaction to a fixed area over a long period of time, potentially. So with all of that in mind, there'll be lots of things your players have done, people they've spoken to that can do things to other things, and for the creatively minded GM, there can be lots and lots of fun things to do within this, and lots of playing to be done with individual plot threads, personal story, etc. The way players interact with the world is also therefore very different. There is more of an emphasis on this sort of organic development, unlike with the journey structure, where it is very difficult to try and create that interaction with the world. With the journey, you end up having the relationships develop with those that are on the journey. There's a reason Sam and Frodo have such a love affair, effectively. It is because they are the ones that are the constant throughout the story, whereas in this setting you have lots of opportunities for relationships to develop between players, NPCs of varying types. And there is a sacrifice there, though. So although you have this opportunity for more variety in terms of incident that you can provide, you have a drawback of having less believable variety to include. Now, this could be for enemies, weather, biomes, settings, you name it really, even monsters. If it's set within one town and you're perpetually throwing lots and lots of different enemies, the thing that does is it invariably waters down the plot and emphasizes that there are lots of plots going on, in which case you're now running a different plot structure. It's not the reveal anymore, it's the multi-strand plot thread system, which is something that suits television if you're running something like Snatch. Great film, absolutely great to watch because you as the viewer can see all of those threads gradually converge, and it's really interesting to see how they interact with each other. When you're watching this in a TTRPG, you only have about 5 to 10% of the information as a viewer or player. You very rarely get any more. Therefore, you never get the satisfaction of seeing how everything's interacted. It's purely something GMs do for self-indulgence, in my opinion. But that being said, most of the Warhammer actual adventures are published in this way, if you've read any of them. And it makes for great GM material because you can then outsource and copy-paste to different places and move bits around and take individual snippets to later locations. So it is great resource material. But personally, I don't have a massive fondness for this style, despite the fact it's the style I've been running. Anyway, so the sacrifice primarily is in variety. But there is also an imposing challenge with this, and it is a big one, because there is a risk of this type of setting, and that is if you have a particularly creative group, a particularly liberal group who are highly autonomous and like to run around doing their own thing, then you have an issue as a GM of improvisation and creativity, because if you have fallen into the easy trap of creating specific events with specific triggers in certain locations, and you perhaps have even created ways for them to solve problems already, and they're not effectively playing ball, then you have this issue. And I'm sure many of you will have come across this, both from a player's point of view and from a GM's point of view. From a player's point of view, it's, hey, I've had all of these great ideas and none of them are working. And from a GM's point of view, it's, I've not prepared that, and that's not where that information is, so you don't get anything from this. In either case, it can be a frustrating experience when there's this clash of expectations. So when you have a lot of group creativity, it really helps to have GM adaptability, allowing them to shape their sandbox in relation to what the players are doing, because otherwise you can effectively have heroes that are treading water for a long period of time with zero plot development, which is not really a sandbox experience because you're not making any progress toward the goal you've been given. It's really just a prolonged experience of exploration and exposition, so basically developing your character, but you know if you've been given the goal already that you're not moving forwards. Thus can be an issue for the overly specific GM. Now, for the specific GM, there are a few tools you can do to get out of this trap a little bit, one of which is to use some mechanical incidents, and you'll see them within crime dramas. There's been another murder. There's been another murder. there's been another murder. A continual string of murders will be a nice way to keep the players interested and keep them focused on, oh, there's a little bit more information you can get from here now, and it's believable if it's a serial murderer. If you just have a single murder at the start, it's going to be a lot harder to do that. So keep that in mind when you're designing your big bads, your precipitating events. It helps if you do have the occasional mechanical incident to keep things moving forward. The alternative is effectively to reduce player agency by telling them what to do via NPCs, letters, instructions, etc. So ultimately the players just go to the points of interest within the zone, thus it being technically a railroad experience with open world setting. It's worth considering that the journey, as we described before, can be completely sandbox, and the reveals, which most would automatically assume to be a sandbox, can be completely railroad, just with a very sort of watered down effect to it. So we now talk about the two main fail states, the two main states where this will all come undone. The first is when there is no mechanical plot or precipitating event, thus the players have no idea what to do, and that's fine early on because the players can be exploring this zone you've created and you can still be coming up with what your plot will be. But if you never give any mechanical plot or precipitating event, not all players will actually start selecting something themselves for them to do. We'll all have seen this as GMs when you say, well, do you have anything you want to do today? And it's, not really. I'm out of ideas. Give that player some mechanical plots. Give them something. If they can't come up with something, help them. If you refuse to, it can be awkward. It's certainly a mistake I've made a lot throughout my life. Now, the flip side is if you only use mechanical plots with clear predetermined solutions, remember, and there's only one way to achieve this ultimate problem. There's only one way to fix this solution, as I have decided by the GM. Here's your next 4 scenes. If you have players that want to express their autonomy, their creativity within this setting, and you don't allow for it, there can be a real clash of interest, and effectively a player can be left thinking, hey, I have freedom to do what I like, but not in relation to the actual game's objectives. So, like, okay, GM, what do you want me to do? Tell me where to go and I'll do it. That's not something you may want unless that player enjoys that type of approach. So do keep in mind, having talked through the ups and downs, the pros and cons of these two different approaches, keep in mind that different players will have different preferences, different GMs will have their own preferences. Autonomy can be a great thing. Too much of it can be a bad thing. It really depends on the individual you're talking about. But one thing is important to consider is that in those situations where autonomy has been attempted by a player, it should be rewarded if it is believable and sensible, practical, and can be implemented. Because if you say no, we're going to segue a little bit here, but if you say no to someone that's making a sexual advance on you several times, you'll be like, Hydra, where did that come from? Bear with me a second. That person will stop making advances fairly quickly. They may start to experience some loathing towards you. They may become frustrated. They might find another GM elsewhere who can satisfy their needs. It is a little perhaps more obvious in that situation, but these things do go on in players' heads, and if there is this spark of creativity, it really does help to nurture it if you want to move in that direction as a GM as well. So, hopefully today's video has been interesting. Lots of waffle and talks, but I really hope it's been something that can help shape the way you can talk with players about the setting. Hey, are you happy with this? Do you need some things to give you a nudge? Do you want to develop more personal stories? Should we try and get some organic stuff happening with you? Or hey, should we just stick to killing monsters? Cool, let's do that. We've got some language now. We've got incidents, organic, mechanical, imposed, you could call them. Hopefully that's of use to you. Guys and girls, thank you very much for stopping on by. Look forward to doing more of these. We're going to be probably covering next how to run a sandbox journey, because I don't think it's that bad. A few tips, a few tricks, it should be useful. Take care.